In 2013, when I was 17, my family was house hunting. The place we eventually bought was shown to us by its owner, a seemingly pleasant older man who claimed he'd built it himself. While my parents chatted with him, I stayed back, pretending to be on my phone but watching. During a pause in the conversation, his expression shifted. His friendly demeanor turned into something dark, his face twisted into a look so hateful and sinister that it made my stomach churn. I don't think he noticed me watching because he quickly resumed his cheerful act with my parents. When I told my mom later, she brushed it off, chalking it up to awkwardness. Despite my unease, we moved into the house a month later. It seemed fine at first, but the second weekend after moving in, my family went to church. I wasn't in the mood to go, so I stayed home. Around 11 a.m., as I lounged upstairs, I heard loud banging from outside. It was rhythmic, coming from the side of the house. At first, I dismissed it as the stormy wind, but after a few minutes, it stopped. I relaxed until I heard something else. Footsteps downstairs. It wasn't subtle. I could hear someone walking around. Chairs scraping. Cabinets opening. Even the fridge door. My heart raced. I crept to my bedroom door, locked it quietly, and grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the corner. With trembling hands, I called 911 and whispered my situation to the operator. The footsteps moved toward the stairs. Every creak of wood felt like a warning shot straight into my chest. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. She was on her way home but was still 30 minutes out. I wasn't sure I could last that long. The steps reached the hallway. I clutched the bat tighter as they grew louder, closer. The handle on my door turned. I froze, barely breathing. The door didn't budge, and then silence fell. I could hear him breathing just on the other side. 10 agonizing seconds passed before he turned away. His footsteps retreated. Then the back door opened and slammed shut. I stayed locked in my room until the police arrived minutes later. They checked the house, but there was no sign of forced entry, and no one was there. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. When my mom got home, I mentioned the locks. That's when it hit us. My stepdad had never changed them. But what really chilled me was what we found upstairs. Earlier that morning, my mom had vacuumed the hallway, leaving it spotless. Now there were muddy shoe prints leading to my bedroom door. Prints far larger than anyone in our family could have made. Even after changing the locks and adding extra security, I never felt safe in that house again. To this day, I can't forget the sound of those footsteps or the breath on the other side of the door. Whoever or whatever was there that day was far too close for comfort. Before the next story, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of these terrifying stories. In early 2022, my wife and I bought a house deep in rural Missouri. It had been built in 1997 by its original owner, who had passed away in the very room he'd spent his final days after a long illness. His wife had lived there alone for years afterward, but eventually had to sell the property due to financial trouble. The house had a lot of charm, but looking back, we should have paid more attention to the eerie undertones surrounding its history. When we first began moving in, we stayed in a hotel about 20 miles away, making daily trips to get things settled. The property, a former horse ranch, was peaceful and secluded. But from the very beginning, strange things started happening. The first instance was the hallway light. I left it on during the day while we went out for errands. By the time we returned, the light had been switched off. At first, I thought nothing of it and turned it back on, only to find it off again later. My wife swore she hadn't touched it. The light switch itself required a deliberate effort to flick, so it wasn't a case of it being loose or faulty. Things escalated quickly. One morning, I went to let our pugs out of the laundry room where they'd been kept overnight. I walked through the patio to the laundry room's exterior door, only to find it completely stuck. No amount of force would make it budge. Annoyed, I returned inside and tried the door from the interior. It opened without issue, smooth as ever. I brushed it off as a fluke, but something about it nagged at me. We left for dinner that evening, leaving the hallway light on once more. When we returned, the light was still on, but the next day, something truly baffling occurred. We found our dogs running loose in the house. The door to the laundry room, which they couldn't possibly open themselves, was closed as though nothing had happened. The handles on all the doors were the pull-down type, and our pugs simply weren't tall or coordinated enough to operate them. I began testing the door to the laundry room. It opened inward with minimal effort, but wouldn't close itself unless someone physically pulled it shut. Yet every time the dogs got out, The door was always securely closed when we returned. The most unnerving event happened a few nights later. I decided to check out the room where the original owner had spent his final days. As I reached for the door handle, I felt resistance, like someone on the other side was holding it firmly in place. The door didn't budge, no matter how hard I pulled. Then, as suddenly as the resistance appeared, it vanished, and the door swung open easily. My stomach turned as I stood there staring into the empty room. After that, I refused to go near that bedroom. The unsettling incidents piled up, and even after we installed an ADT security system, things didn't stop. When we were away, the alarms would trigger. Twice, the front door reportedly opened on its own, with motion detected in the living room. But when officers checked, everything appeared normal and secure. We've since left the house due to flooding and are back in California, waiting for repairs to be completed. But honestly, neither of us is sure if we'll return. The property feels heavy, as though something doesn't want us there. Despite blessing the house, the strange occurrences persist, and I've begun to wonder if I crossed a line by destroying an old personal item left behind by the previous owners, a keepsake tied to a deceased family member. For now, we're trying to figure out what to do. I don't want to live in fear, but I also don't want to abandon the house entirely. My wife seems less bothered by it, but I've told her, if we go back, I'm filling the place with crosses. Whatever is lingering in that house, it feels like it hasn't decided whether to let us stay or push us out for good. Before the next story, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of these terrifying stories. A few years ago, my mom, brother, and I moved from downstate to upstate New York. We just finished high school, and the neighborhood we ended up in was quiet, mostly older folks. The house we bought had belonged to an elderly couple, but they didn't pass away. They just moved to a smaller place. The first year living there was uneventful. The house had its creaks and groans like any other, but there was one thing I couldn't explain: footsteps in my mom's bedroom. I'd hear them clearly when I was in the basement, but I was always alone when they happened. I tried brushing it off as house noises, but it was hard to convince myself of that. Then came Thanksgiving. That morning, I was responsible for loading all the food we'd cooked into the car. The chilly air made me rush a bit as I carefully arranged the dishes in the back seat. As I placed the last pie in its spot, I heard a woman's voice behind me. "You better be careful with that," she said teasingly. I froze, thinking it was a neighbor or someone passing by. With a polite smile, I turned around to respond, but no one was there. The street was empty, and the chilly morning felt even colder. I glanced toward the house and the porch, but saw no one. For a moment, I thought it might be my brother playing a prank on me, so I checked around the garage and front yard. He wasn't there. Right then, my mom stepped outside, and I asked her if she'd said something. She gave me a puzzled look and shook her head. I didn't tell her, but I felt uneasy after that. The voice had been so clear, so real. It didn't seem like something I imagined. A month later, during winter break, I was lying in bed late one night. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. Then I heard it, soft, muffled sobbing. At first, I thought it might be my mom. Just as I was about to check on her, I got a text from her. "Hey, are you okay?" Confused, I replied, "Yeah, why?" Her answer sent a shiver down my spine. "I heard crying and thought it was you." I told her I'd thought it was her, or maybe even the dog, but she said no. The dog was asleep at the end of her bed. We agreed it was probably the wind, maybe even a coyote, though deep down, I knew it wasn't. The sound had been too human, too sorrowful. A few weeks later, I decided to ask my mom what she thought about everything. The footsteps, the voice, the crying. She hesitated before answering. "I think it might be Grandma," she said quietly. My grandmother had passed away about 6 months after we moved into the house. My mom explained that sometimes she'd hear knocking on her bedroom door late at night. She always thought it was me or my brother, but when she checked, no one was there. I didn't have the heart to tell her, but I didn't think it was Grandma. She had never been to this house. She got sick around the time we moved in and never had the chance to visit. Besides, the voice I'd heard on Thanksgiving didn't sound like her at all. Grandma's voice was soft, warm, and calming. The one I'd heard was sharp, almost mocking. Even now, I'm not sure who or what was in that house, but every time I think about it, I remember the sound of that voice, and it leaves a chill that's hard to shake.